Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Anderson Plumbing, Heating and Air, proud to support the mission of KPBS and privileged to serve San Diego clients. Anderson Plumbing, Heating and Air, helping homeowners maintain drain, heating, and cooling systems since 1978. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marco Shiley, and by the following. And by viewers like you. Thank you.
Good evening. It's Friday, May 1st. Thank you for joining us. I'm Maya Trabulsi. They did not mask their displeasure. Hundreds locally and across the state demonstrating today against staying at home. The rally's coming on a day when masks are now essential wear, not just for essential workers, but for us all. We are going to show you those protests and others in a moment, but first, the county announced another 10 deaths from COVID-19 and 147 new cases. KPBS reporter John Carroll has the latest.
When you leave your place, cover your face. That helpful rhyme becomes a requirement today if you're going to come within 6 feet of anyone, anywhere, except a member of your household. Supervisor Nathan Fletcher says that's part of moving from April, a month of action, into May, a month of adaptation. If you're out and about without a facial covering and a member of law enforcement sees you, you might just get some help instead of a ticket.
And so today we are releasing 10,000 face coverings to our law enforcement partners, police departments, sheriff's departments, and other entities that they can have on hand to make available to residents at no cost.
In Sacramento, Friday was a day to take stock of the progress that has gotten California to where it is today, a state where the healthcare system has not been overloaded, where steps have been taken to successfully flatten the curve. This being May Day, a day dedicated to celebrating working people, the governor had plenty of thank yous to hand out to essential workers, those in healthcare, people who keep the food chain up and running, from farm workers to truckers to restaurant workers and people who staff our grocery stores. Then, perhaps anticipating a question about protests up and down the state against stay-at-home orders, Newsom talked about another aspect of May Day.
And on May Day every year since my birth, that's a day to express yourself, which I think is a wonderful tradition in this country. And people protesting the status quo, which is also a wonderful point of privilege we have in the United States. But that expression, obviously, this year is one of frustration and concern and deeply understandable anxiety about the economy and the fate and future of their families.
But protesters in Sacramento and elsewhere haven't just been expressing opposition to the governor's stay-at-home orders. Some are calling him a tyrant and a dictator. And after yesterday's announcement of beach closures in Orange County because of last week's beach crowds and subsequent lawsuits against those closures, Newsom refused to engage, instead reminding people of the science he says is the foundation of those stay-at-home orders.
And we see the images we saw last weekend and concentration of thousands of people, we could start to see a spread again. And so that's the only thing that will set us back. But I appreciate expression. I appreciate points of view.
Just like a good TV news tease writer, the governor did hold out some hope for some modifications in the stay-at-home orders come next week. That is, if we all keep doing what we've been doing that got us here. John Carroll, KPBS News.
Hundreds of protesters made their feelings known by packing downtown streets and sounding off over rights they claim they're being denied. KPBS reporter Eric Anderson with more on their message and the action taken by police.
There were plenty of protesters jamming the sidewalks in front of the Halls of Justice. People are upset about the limitations put on them because of COVID-19. Spa owner Heather Molchanoff had a clear message for the state's top politician.
Governor Newsom, don't get a haircut by the end of this. If we're not essential, you shouldn't be getting a haircut. It doesn't make any sense. It's not fair and it's not right.
Local radio host Bob Siegel rallied the protesters, giving an impassioned speech over a bullhorn.
That's not a conspiracy theory!
Even with that, it was difficult to hear him because protesters in cars were circling the block, keeping one hand on the wheel and the other on the horn. Siegel says government has tightened the screws on people's lives.
It started out with, if you shake hands with people, wash your hands. Then it turned into the elbow bump. Then it turned into 6 feet apart, then a mask, then 6 feet apart even if you have a mask, that kind of thing.
The We Have Rights protesters worked with San Diego police to make sure the event happened without problems, and there were plenty of police officers watching, but they were not arresting or ticketing people who violated social distancing rules or the county's new requirement that people wear masks in public when they're close to others.
We have to honor the First Amendment, and then we're trying to balance all of that with the current health codes, the county health codes that we're enforcing in the county.
This protest isn't the first in San Diego over COVID-19 restrictions, and based on the group's ability to organize, it likely won't be the last. Eric Anderson, KPBS News.
And nurses rallied at the VA hospital in La Jolla today, but for a very different reason. National Nurses United held protests at VAs around the country, pointing to lack of personal protective equipment. Marie Hamito is a nurse on the COVID-19 unit at the La Jolla VA, and she says nurses feel they have to ration N95 masks and personal protective wear. Hamito says nurses understand the risk.
We're taught and well prepared how to manage that. But supplies definitely help with reassurances because this is such a novel virus and it's scary.
And a VA San Diego official says there were shortages early on in San Diego, but they now have an adequate supply. The San Diego VA has had 34 cases of COVID-19 among patients. 18 staff members have also tested positive. A statewide rent strike made its way right through parts of our county today by way of a car caravan. This being the first of the month, rent is due, and with nearly 1 in 4 San Diegans now unemployed, many families won't be able to pay. KPBS reporter Max Rivlin-Nadler shows us how some are fighting back.
A caravan of protesters wound through San Diego today, part of a statewide rent strike. More than a month into the coronavirus lockdown and resulting local economic collapse, many tenants are stuck between having to choose between paying rent or paying for other necessities. Some tenant advocates say the government hasn't done enough to support renters.
The government is more concerned about this economic crisis rather than the impact on the very people who make the economy work, which are workers and families, and we're exchanging this pandemic for a mass eviction crisis.
San Diego's had an eviction moratorium in place since March, but it's due to expire at the end of May. A recent survey by a landlords association found that under 10% of landlords in San Diego saw late or non-payment of rents in April. The president of a landlords group says an organized rent strike is misdirected.
I think there's a difference between I can't pay my rent and I won't pay my rent. There's one thing to be said for I'm looking for a job, I'm waiting for unemployment. We understand that. But the thing is the people that can pay their rent, if they can, I feel that they should, because again, that helps keep that property running.
That group is also calling on the state and federal government to step up support to tenants in the form of rental vouchers. Max Rivlin-Nadler, KPBS News.
Families in southeastern San Diego who are struggling to make ends meet got a little help today. Assemblymember Todd Gloria joined the San Diego Food Bank to distribute food in Oak Park this morning. Over $100 in groceries were handed out to 400 families in drive-through and walk-up pickup areas.
Communities like this one are disproportionately impacted, both in terms of infections, but also in terms of the economic impacts. And that's why focusing resources here in Southeast is pretty darn important.
A drive-through testing clinic will open tomorrow in southeastern San Diego. It's from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. at the Euclid Health Center. A doctor's referral and appointment are required. San Diego faces a budget shortfall of some $300 million because of the pandemic. During public meetings all next week, City Council members will comb through the proposed budgets of each city department. A report from the city's independent budget analyst says tree trimming and weed abatement would all but disappear. Graffiti removal and pothole repair would take about 2 days longer. The mayor's revised budget due in mid-May will likely include even more cuts. By tomorrow, more than 30 states will have relaxed coronavirus-related restrictions. Today, in Texas, malls, restaurants, and movie theaters are just some of the many places that can reopen. Nadia Romero in Dallas with more.
Inside a cafe in Katy, Texas, diners sit together and eat breakfast. The morning ritual seems simple, but just a month ago, 9 out of 10 Americans were under stay-at-home orders.
I think it's time. We've done all the right precautions and everything for the time being.
Across Texas, restaurants, shopping malls, and theaters are allowed to reopen, but with limits on occupancy.
I think everybody's excited to look at the opportunity of being able to get reopened and re-invite customers and guests into their locations.
By the end of the week, more than 30 states across the country will be partially opened, but the nation's top infectious disease expert fears some may be moving too quickly.
There's no doubt in my mind that when you pull back mitigation, you're going to start seeing cases crop up here and there. And if you're not able to handle them, you're going to see another peak, a spike.
As most states relax restrictions, others extend stay-at-home orders.
We remain in a state of emergency. That is a fact.
Back in Texas, sanitizer stands at registers and bakeries, while staff in bookstores wear masks and gloves, all to strike a balance between safety and getting back to business.
Beginning to see the beaches open, beginning to see guests on the beach, and it's just paints for a very optimistic picture for the weekend and for the future.
In Dallas, Texas, Nadia Romero, KPBS News.
Mayor Kevin Faulconer is reminding San Diegans to follow the rules at the beach and parks this weekend so that the partial reopenings can remain in place. However, Chula Vista parks will remain closed. The Chula Vista city manager told our news partner KGTV that with COVID-19 cases increasing in the South Bay, the city will stay the course under its own emergency order. You can walk, bike, or run in your neighborhood park, but you must keep moving. Every day we see San Diegans helping in their own way with simple gestures to lift some spirits. One of those comes from a small donut shop in East County. KPBS producer Ben Lacey has the story.
Topic 4, our continued efforts to highlight San Diegans stepping up in a great time of need.
It's become a point of pride for San Diego Mayor Kevin Faulconer during daily updates on COVID-19, focusing on the good during a difficult time.
One local bakery that wanted to bring smiles to people's faces.
We're doing a good for the community. That's all we need.
That's Eduardo Martinez of Holy Donuts. He and co-owner Tim Ovies opened up their shop in El Cajon just as everything else closed down.
The day of, that was actually going to be our grand opening.
We knew it would be slow, but in the end, it'll all work out okay. We'll be better for it.
Every day, Holy Donuts delivers unsold donuts to Father Joe's villages. That connection led Tim to the convention center, now a home for San Diego's unsheltered.
Well, we took about 2,000 donut holes, packaged 4 in a box individually. They were ecstatic. I mean, it was so nice to meet the people that are down there. There's so many different groups doing wonderful things down there. Even though we're in El Cajon and he's the mayor of the city of San Diego, it doesn't matter. In a time like this, let's all be together.
A sweet example of San Diego County coming together. Mayor Faulconer says he's looking for more.
So if you see a San Diegan stepping up, share it with us with the hashtag San Diego Steps Up.
Stepping up, one donut at a time. Ben Lacey, KPBS News.
And because of the pandemic, Father Joe's Villages had to stop donation drop-offs and close its stores. But for a limited time, you can now drop off your household donations during the spring cleaning drive. There are 3 locations that are accepting household donations: in Hillcrest, El Cajon, and at the San Diego warehouse. Donation drop-offs will be contact-free, as customers can just drop their donations into bins. The first drive ends on May 2nd. The second drive runs from May 6th until the 9th. Furniture and large appliances will not be accepted. And we're following all of the latest coronavirus-related developments for you at kpbs.org. Just click on the Tracking COVID-19 link on our homepage, and you'll be taken to a page with all of our recent reports. It's shaping up to be a beautiful weekend, but another heat wave is expected to arrive next week. Jeff Cornish has your forecast.
Hey, before we get into the typical forecast, wanted to take a look at how well we've done with rainfall. Typically, April's when we really begin to dry out. And last month, we had 472% of normal, about almost 5 times the typical amount of rain in what's typically the first dry month of the year. So we held on to the wet season a little late. And this was good news because we were so dry in February and into March. So we made up for some lost ground there. Weather-wise, we are going to be dry, breezy, and warm for the next few days. Interior deserts may get a little cooler into the weekend. Still hot there. Coastal areas will actually get a little warmer. So the difference between the coast and the inland deserts may become a little less dramatic, but only by a few degrees here through Saturday and Sunday. Tonight we'll get down into the low 60s and mid 50s in some areas. Ramona down to 50 degrees, one of the cooler spots. Borrego Springs still staying toasty at 68. Tomorrow up around 97 degrees in Borrego Springs, but 79s into Escondido and into places like Ramona, and 75 into San Diego. Early next week, we're going to hold on to the warmth out there. It will generally be an offshore wind for us, but not a tenaciously offshore wind. So the deserts are going to be especially hot, and it will be warm near the coast, but maybe not as warm as we were about a week ago. Coastal forecast, it does heat up to near 80 on Tuesday and 82 on Wednesday, so that will be very warm compared to the norm. Inland areas, this is where it's going to be especially hot. You're going to feel the heat 88 Tuesday, 93 Wednesday, but the weekend will be pretty tolerable in areas just a little ways inland. Mountain forecast, we're going to go from the mid-60s on Monday to the mid-70s on Wednesday. This is a dry forecast. And to close us out into the deserts, the heat backs off just a bit. Excessive heat warnings not in effect for now. Sunday 96, but back up to 104. The heat will be on into the middle of next week. Enjoy your weekend. I'm meteorologist Jeff Cornish for KPBS News.
The entire crews of the USS Roosevelt and USS Kidd have now been tested for the coronavirus. The Navy says the Roosevelt now has 1,102 active cases, many who are not showing any symptoms. The Kidd, which stopped in San Diego on Tuesday following its outbreak, has 78 cases. The destroyer is undergoing a deep cleaning before it heads back out to sea. And while the military has put many things on hold because of the coronavirus, people are still allowed to leave the service. KPBS military reporter Steve Walsh says the Navy is encouraging more sailors to stay, even for a few more months.
Typically, the Navy loses about as many people as it trains, says Vice Admiral John Nowell, who is in charge of personnel for the Navy.
On a normal year, we'll bring in about 40,000 sailors, and we have about 40,000 sailors that go home.
But this isn't a normal year. Like with the other services, the Navy has suspended advancement exams. New recruit training was temporarily halted at boot camp. In San Diego and other places, the Navy shut down classrooms after cases of COVID-19 were discovered. A military-wide stop movement order has even made it more difficult to move sailors from one place to another. At the same time, people are still allowed to leave the Navy.
The stop movement does not apply to folks that are retiring or separating. Those moves are considered mission essential. If they've got their papers in and they continue to want to execute their departure, then we'll make that happen. We'll take appropriate safeguards. But for the sailors, there is a lot of uncertainty and there's a lot of churn out there right now.
So the Navy is trying to convince seasoned sailors to stay a little longer, at least during the crisis. They're giving sailors the unusual option of staying another 6 months up to a year through April 2021, while the training pipeline is partially frozen.
So it's a win-win both ways, I think.
The Navy could force sailors to stay. After 9/11, the Bush administration didn't allow people to leave either active duty or the reserves if their unit was about to be deployed to Iraq or Afghanistan. The Pentagon has reportedly looked at a so-called stop-loss order in recent months, but there hasn't been a formal proposal. Instead, the Navy has offered incentives in medicine and other vital areas. Kenneth Taylor is a senior chief petty officer on board the carrier USS Truman. He works in aviation maintenance and was scheduled to retire.
I actually had several job interviews scheduled, but I had to cancel them because I wasn't going to be home in time to make those interviews.
The USS Truman is off the coast of North Carolina. The ship has not made port as part of the Navy's plan to stop the spread of the coronavirus. He concedes those potential job offers with airlines probably wouldn't have come through At least not right now. Taylor says his wife actually heard about the program.
So she told me, just if it's applicable to you, just do it. Take the extra year and have a job, a guaranteed job for another year, and we'll try to find something next year.
John Cedeno is the chief counselor at Naval Base San Diego. He says right now he's meeting with sailors on Zoom as they pass through the base on their way out of the service.
We have junior sailors that were transitioning out and getting ready to go to college. We have sailors that are retiring, that were getting ready to go back to their families.
Sailors who are retiring with 20 or more years of service usually start processing their paperwork 2 years ahead of time.
Once you get to the end, you're kind of excited. You're kind of a little relieved that, hey, my service is done and I'm ready to transition out. But now it's like, what am I transitioning into? You know, and I think that causes a lot of stress too.
The Navy has invited recent retirees with medical backgrounds to come back and offered to retain some officers after they've reached the Navy's mandatory retirement age. All of this, Admiral Nowell says he hopes will give the Navy stability while they figure out what it will take to get the military back to training new sailors at the pace they were just a few months ago. Steve Walsh, KPBS News.
The slowdown at meat processing plants has led to a new wave of panic shopping. Now some grocery stores are limiting how much meat shoppers can buy. Albertsons, Vons, and Pavilions across Southern California have issued a temporary limit of 2 packages per household on select items. Ralph's is only limiting ground beef and fresh pork purchases. With fewer people using its services, Lyft is planning to lay off nearly 1,000 staffers and furlough almost 300 more. Additionally, the ride-sharing company is reducing salaries for employees and executives. Its rival, Uber, is also considering layoffs. As of this week, more than 30 million Americans have filed for unemployment. SDSU's Miro Kopik weighed in for this Friday Business Report.
To put it in perspective, during the entire Great Recession, we lost 8.7 million jobs. We gained and created 22 million jobs from the end of the Great Recession till now. And the loss of 30 million jobs, we're at a deficit of 16 million jobs going back all the way before the Great Recession. So that's a major statement. 50% of Americans say that somebody in their household either has lost a job or, if they're hourly, has had significant cutbacks in the number of hours. So we anticipate that the unemployment rate, when it'll be announced next week in the jobs report, we had talked about the last couple of weeks it being in the 12-13% range. It might actually cross 15%.
While the La Jolla Playhouse had to close its doors, it's creating new content online to stay connected to both its artists and its audiences. KPBS arts reporter Beth Accomando explains.
La Jolla Playhouse has a saying on the wall of its meeting room, a safe harbor for the unsafe and surprising. But what happens when it's no longer safe to keep your doors open during a pandemic? Artistic director Christopher Ashley was out of the office in New York for previews of the Playhouse's Diana when the orders came down from California's governor last month, restricting public gatherings.
So between Diana, 2 shows at the Playhouse, all 5 productions have come from away around the world, and a Margaritaville tour, I actually shut down 9 shows in one day, which was a first for me.
With its doors shut, the Playhouse could no longer do live performances.
Everyone at La Jolla Playhouse, their whole brain space is trying to wrap around how do we stay in contact? How do we keep our audiences and our artists talking to each other?
But the Playhouse has 2 great resources to tap into: the artists it has worked with and a rich history and vault of material to draw on to create online content.
So we're doing cut songs from La Jolla Playhouse shows. We're kind of releasing those over time.
Amber Waves, Purple Dawn.
We're also doing this piece called The Vault, which is every week an artist or a staff member or a volunteer shares a favorite Playhouse photo, video, or memory.
The memory I want to share today is about Yoshimi Battles the Pink Robots. And I do want to say that sometimes the shows you remember most fondly are the ones that pushed you to your limits.
So you're getting to hear about a Playhouse moment from a Playhouse show from the point of view of someone who made that moment or someone for whom that was a real turning point in their life. Also, our education department has kind of come out on all cylinders firing. They're creating new online engagement classes for educators, students, and families. But also there's all of this artistic energy and storytelling energy and desire to explore the world together and not feel too cut off at home that I think defines this moment.
And nothing may define this moment better than having the Playhouses Without Walls, or WOW Festival, move online.
It seemed like such a natural thing to take this work that's been out in the world, not inside a theater, that's been inspired by stories inspired by a place, and that it's re-envisioning the relationship between artist, audience, and story. It seemed like such a natural thing to say, well, let's move that online. While there can be no in-person public gatherings, this seems like an amazing thing, and the artists we've talked to are all incredibly juiced and excited about making a new piece of art in this moment that helps people connect.
Next week, I'll speak with local artists on the challenges of connecting with audiences online and of creating site-specific work from quarantine. Beth Accomando, KPBS News.
And you can find that story and the rest of tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thank you for joining us. I'm Maya Trabulsi. Have a good night.
Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Anderson Plumbing, Heating and Air, proud to support the mission of KPBS and privileged to serve San Diego clients. Anderson Plumbing, Heating and Air, helping homeowners maintain drain, heating, and cooling systems since 1978. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marco Shiley. And by the following: and by viewers like you. Thank you.